the future if necessary. A few things I'm happy to, for people to put things in the chat, questions as we go along that we can pick up on, or there's probably a point where I'll stop and just take a pause and get some conversation going. Yeah, so a bit about me. Documentary photography. Someone said the other night when we were watching a TV quiz, what would be my specialist subject? And I said probably documentary photography in the late 20th century, I suppose. But I studied at Newport, the great documentary photography course there, the MA, which was fantastic back in the 90s. So that was my thing really from then. I think with this one, that's, again, like all the lectures, and I always say this, it's very, very subjective. So this is my view, from a white middle class person from England, male, and I think if someone in Africa made this lecture, probably would be completely different. So we have to acknowledge that. And some of the lecture put together on this theme might not have any of the stuff I've got in it at all. I mean, I think that's pushing it a bit, probably would, but you know what I mean. You get the point, okay? So, and it's such a huge field. I mean, obviously, whenever you start to put something together like this, you realize how vast it is. So, yeah, that's another thing to, and also I think things take time to bed in or come out with all these things. So we can think we're up to the, know what's going on, it's important at the moment, but actually in 10 years' time, we might look back and say, actually, that wasn't very interesting, but that was, okay? So it's quite difficult to reflect on contemporary things that are going on in current practice as to how important they will be. It's the important thing. One thing to say, I suppose, is that definition, documentary photojournalism, that is always what is photojournalism? What is documentary photography? And I think it's generally felt that photojournalism is like more one-off photographs of events, like a bomb going off or a celebrity coming out of a club. These are the sort of things that are photojournalism. Documentary is generally a longer projects, a little bit more considered and a little bit more complex, that try and go a little bit deeper than just the surface image, which is what we think of as photojournalism being more like that. But look, again, there's loads of crossover. There's no way of defining these things precisely. Okay. So we'll have a break because I have to load the second half, and it's quite a big PowerPoint because it's got some videos. So we'll have a 10-minute break. I doubt if we'll go on for an hour and a half, but we'll see. So that's the plan. Yeah. So welcome everyone. Okay. So let's move through this then. So yeah, because this morning I thought, oh, I'm not sure what documentary photography is. Sorry, I shouldn't admit that, but it's so complex that I just asked ChatGPT, which was quite interesting. And it came up with documentary photography as a style of photography aims to chronicle events or environments in a truthful, objective, and often candid way, typically to tell a story or provide a visual record of real-world events. It focuses on capturing reality as it is without manipulation or staging to document a subject, social issue, or significant event with honesty and authenticity. Okay, so that was quite interesting because there's several things in there which we can take some serious issue with as we go through the lecture, okay? But it was interesting that ChatGPT pulled together all these sources to come up with that one, which kind of I half expected. But we'll see, some of that will be questioned very much as we go through this lecture. So, the obvious, I've done this lecture as a timeline, which I thought was the simplest way because it is a complex area. So I've done it as a timeline. You'll see 1837 up there, and each one has a date, and we come up to 2024. Okay, so, and I think this is one of the first ever photographs daguerreotype, right, by one of the first surviving plates from Daguerre, made in 1837. And it's interesting when we talk about what is a documentary photograph, because it just looks, it's just like some buildings, okay? But I think once we have the shoe shine in here, once we have a person shining a shoe, then it becomes more, yes, it's a documentary image because it's very much telling us something about people and society. And I think really documentary has to be doing that, okay? So yeah, first documentary image probably is, whether it was staged or not. I mean, these are long exposures. Whether Daguerre staged it, I don't know, but probably we'll have this as the first one. Okay. And then 1855, we're moving along 18 years time. We've got processes developed. Okay, so technology has moved on. So the daguerreotype was a particular type of plate. And now we've got wet collodion, which is a very, very clumsy system of photography. Wet collodion plate, coated wet, exposed while wet, and then it had to be dried, big glass plate. So it was quite incredible that Roger Fenton managed to get all this gear off to the Crimean War and take photographs. Yeah, this was 1855. And he took 360 photographs in this war zone. And as we can see from this one, they're staged. Okay, all his photographs were staged. There's no like battle pictures of battle from the front line. You know, they're all the aftermath of stuff, and they're all staged because the exposures were very long. You'd have to set this up, and also they were propaganda images. Okay, so they were used by the Times to show how well, you know, British troops were doing in the for US troops, British troops were doing in the war, and used to recruit. Okay, so they're very much a construction, but they're fast. It's a fascinating story, and they're just like fascinating images. So if we come on to 1877, move forward another 20 years, we've got, this is the kind of thing I think that people think more of as documentary and still do. Okay, this black and white street type thing. I think if you asked 100 people what is documentary photography, they'd probably say, oh, pictures that someone takes on the street wandering along of things happening, you know, or war photography, probably say that. Okay, so this is more like the sort of classic documentary image. And this is John Thompson. And he worked with a social journalist called Adolph Smith, okay, to put together a book called London Labour and the London Poor. So it's pretty groundbreaking for 1877. So you've got flower sellers, chimney sweeps, you know, shoe shines, musicians, all the people on the street, and the text with them as well, which is really important. It's a very rare book. It's a very, very important book. But it's starting to see, aren't we, the potential for photography to actually make a statement or comment on social conditions. And John Thompson, along with Smith, one of the first sort of projects in that area. Moving forward 10 years in America, photography was in quite an advanced state, really. A lot of people were using it for various different things. And this is The Other Half Lives by Jacob Riis from 1889. I documented the squalid living conditions in New York City slums in the 1880s. And this term, muckraking journalism, okay, came out of this. Basically, it means someone who's exposing the muck, raking up dirt, you know, finding things that aren't right, exposing, you know, they're using this journalism to expose the fact that there's all these slums in New York and someone needs to do something about it. This isn't good enough. Okay. And yeah, it had an impact, you know, people listened. I'm not quite sure how it was circulated, probably in some sort of newspaper format. But yeah, this was a groundbreaking project. You can see he would have used flash. So it's a very sort of blank, bland image, very flat. Aesthetically, it's kind of not as pleasing, is it, as the John Thompson one, which is quite nice, you know, the black and white shoe shine going on the street. This is just like documenting, trying to document the fact, really. And there's loads of people in here. I think someone, maybe there's 7 people, 6 or 7 people living in this 5-cent lodging room. And it's, yeah, of course, a fascinating photograph. And as photography developed towards the end of the 19th century, a lot of disciplines recognized the potential for photography for them to use it within their own discipline. Okay, and this is one of the famous work by Bertillon, French, I don't know, physician, French doctor, medic, and he saw the potential for photography to classify Okay, so this is quite a big thing, isn't it? So photography as evidence, you know. So here we've got certain types of personality types. So he thought, you know, he could say, okay, this person's got that sort of forehead or that sort of nose. They must be that. Okay. And I think Dalton as well in the UK was doing a similar thing where they were classifying people saying this is a, you know, this is a lunatic, as they would call them then, you know, because of their eyes are in this position, or this person is a, you know, a possible murderer because of this. And it was really, really dangerous stuff. Um, but Bertillon and Dalton and people thought, yeah, photography is showing us how we can classify these people. And obviously here we've got the kind of the beginning, that sort of mugshot idea as well, for classifying people through how they look. So there was a lot of dangerous thinking going on around photography's relationship to reality and the truth. Okay, just at the start, beginning of the 20th century, then. I mean, I will say that I'll say this quite a lot, like important or iconic, you know, those sorts of things. Because certainly Auger has to be one of those. The a photographer whose name always crops up in histories of photography, or being influential to certain photographers. He had a huge 35 years he was photographing in Paris, created an encyclopedic, yeah, idiosyncratic portrait of the city, just as it goes into the sort of modern era in the early part of the 20th century. So Victorian, Edwardian sort of, I mean, not in our times, you know, that sort of period. And the pictures are, well, they're very carefully composed. They're very ghostly. So quite often there's nobody in any of them. They're empty streets. So they have this real sort of melancholy about them. But I think that it's when I talked earlier about how important it was to have a person in the picture for documentary, actually, it's kind of with Daget's, it seems to be like the absence is the thing that makes it what it is, because you start to look around at all the detail, the text, or the wheelbarrow there, what's going on with the ladders, you know, you start to piece together stories from stuff which isn't, there's no people. So quite a different form of image making, very carefully composed, technically very good. And he'd been seen, because it was the surrealist period anyway, 1920s, 30s. He's been sort of lumped in with the surrealists quite often, because of this sort of uncanny, weird juxtaposition of stuff in the pictures quite often. So yeah, very, very important work. And then more muckraking. Okay, so this was Louis Hine in the early part of the 20th century in America, following on from Riis. Hine was a sociologist, and he was interested in child labour. So he went into the cotton mills and photographed child labour, young children working on these huge mills. Took over 200 pictures, and you know, again, realised that photography could be used as a tool for social change and reform. So actually, they helped repeal some of the bring in some of the child labour laws in the United States, making it you know, illegal to employ young children. And this was checked out by authorities and stuff. So a very early example of documentary photography being used to for positive social change. And we often put Riis and Hine together as a muckraker journalists. So yeah, big change in the 1920s, and we will see how important it is, how technology is so important with change, and within documentary photography generally, of course. But there are key moments of technological advancement where things change, and the Leica was that first one really in the 1920s. So previously we had big cameras, stick them on a tripod, take your time, setting it all up, long exposures. Now the Leica, you can just put it around in your pocket, you know, and take quick photographs with small film, popularized 35mm photography massively. Really good lenses, different shutter speeds, apertures, the whole business, 36 photos, I think, on maybe it was that point on a film, so you could get through them quite quickly. And you didn't have to take your time setting up tripods and doing all that sort of stuff. So this was a revolution. Okay. And then in 1926, we had like the first famous quote, or the first famous attempt to kind of theorize documentary, I suppose. And this is the great John Grierson, who was a great thinker, philosopher, documentary practitioner. And John Grierson defined documentary as the creative treatment of actuality. Okay, so this is when you're thinking, actually, hold on a minute, this isn't actuality we're seeing. There's some sort of creative business going on here. Okay, and this quote now is 100 years old, and it's still sits there as underpinning the sort of difficulties around documentary photography practice. Another very important book. So we got the Second World War is looming in Europe. So there's trouble in Europe. There's Germany's going through a difficult time. The Nazis are beginning to establish themselves. And Sander did a portrait called a piece called Face of Our Time, published in 1929. This is 1932. And these are portraits. So it's kind of like the story of Germany through formal portraiture. So we're beginning to see that documentary doesn't have to just be candid things happening, and us snapping them. It can be a more constructed thing. And Sander's formal portraiture says so much about that time. Okay. He was a part of the New Objectivity movement. So again, he did want his photographs to expose truths, but again, it's hard to sort of theorize that. He ended up with awful trouble with the Nazis. They basically burned all his books, tried to get all his negatives and burn them all. They were disgusted because people like our pastry chef here didn't sort of stand up to that idea of the Aryan race, and that sort of stereotype that the Nazis wanted their people to be. And he also photographed people like gender, cross-gender, transsexuals, which were really controversial. And I don't think they were released as such, but portraits of people who are not sure, male or female, basically. And he was often photographing people on the edge, people who weren't mainstream. Okay, and this got into real problems with the Nazi Party. I think this period up on now, 30s up probably to the 60s, is a really nice, simple time for documentary photography. There's not too many complex things going on. We've had Grierson's quote. I mean, a lot of people wouldn't have known about that anyway, but it's quite stable at this point. So everyone's using a Leica, black and white. Everyone's using a Leica. People can photograph all sorts of different things. Sander's an example. And then we had the Farm Security Administration Project, okay, in the 1936. So Great American Depression, 35 to 43. So there was a thing called the Resettlement Administration, which became the FSA, the Farm Security Administration. And Roy Stryker was in charge of this and was able to give photographers money to go and record what was going on, the hard times for particularly farm workers in the Dust Bowl. Okay. And this is one of the most important documentary photography projects there's been. There were kind of propaganda images, again, to sort of so that the American people would support those working in the Dust Bowl, because they were going through such difficult times. So Rothstein's picture, for example, shows real hardship, You know, the father presumably with the two children rushing to a almost like a submerged shack. Yeah, so there's a group of photographers, the FSA photographers. A great body of work came out of this. And the most famous one, of course, is Dorothea Lange's Migrant Mother. This is the image, definitely, of the Great Depression in America. This is Florence Owens Thompson is the subject. And she was there with her children, living in a tent, basically moving around trying to get work to survive. And this is Lange's picture of her. And like an awful lot of pictures during this period, it's been analysed so much, and generally this is, it's a heavy construction, this. So we like the idea of Dorothea Lange just wandering by and seeing this and taking a quick snap, but actually she set it all up. So there are you see the contact sheets, that's the problem. So you see the contact sheets and how Lange's working methods. So we can see how she started off showing this kind of hovel with all the people in the background, rubbish everywhere, and then she's gone tighter and tighter, and in the end set this up, got the children to look away, got the woman looking into the distance in a very sort of positive, kind of like thoughtful way. So probably one of the most famous documentary images of all time, I would say. But yeah, it's heavily constructed, as Grierson said, the creative treatment of actuality is exactly what it is. And then again, 1936, this period, there's loads of stuff going on. This is Capa's famous image called Falling Soldier, or Loyalist Militiaman at the Moment of Death. It's got all sorts of names. Falling Soldier, yeah, it's a common name for it, 1936. Spanish Civil War. It supposedly shows the death of a Republican soldier. It's meant to be this anarchist militiaman, Federico Garcia, and it's meant to show the moment when he's killed. But again, the contact sheets have been looked at, unfortunately, and they show some set-up pictures of people on the ground, and then them being alive in the next picture. So the whole sort of like fabric is taken away from this picture. It's a strong picture, but I mean, the thought of the photographer being right there next to somebody and having the camera on them when they're shot, it just seems ridiculously unlikely, doesn't it? But for years and years, that's what it was felt to be. But obviously Capa was on the he was on one side, so he was gonna try and tell the story he wanted to tell, hence setting up a few pictures. That's no problem, is it? So I'm puncturing this essay with a few theoretical and writings, because I think that's really important. So we had Walter Benjamin's essay in 1936. 1936 is a big year, isn't it? Migrant Mother, Capa, Walter Benjamin, the work of art in the age of mechanical reproduction. So he is not all about photography, but he's basically saying that, because photography is reproducible and can be mass produced, it doesn't have an aura. Okay. And that's quite, let me have a little break there. So what do I mean by that aura then? Put it in the chat if you've got any thoughts about that. We'll have a drink. So photographs don't really have an aura. Why is that? What is an aura? What do I mean by that? Anyone got any ideas? No. It's not the easiest question. I'll give you that. Oh, well done, Alice. Yeah. The prestige. Yeah. Prestige is a good word, isn't it? Prestige, like the sort of the aura. The prestige is like the weight or the significance. Yeah, the significance of an artwork. Yeah, that's a good phrase. What does there's another idea then? What does have aura? What creative, creative outputs do have an aura? That's another way of putting it. Films. Cool, blimey, yeah. Films have everything, don't they? I mean, yeah. I think all films have an aura. I wasn't thinking of that, but now you mention it, they all do. I'm not sure they do when you look at them on a phone, but when you see them in the cinema, they do. What about other things? Any other things from history that have an aura? Yeah, okay, good. So Khadija is getting there, I think, with that one. So portrait paintings, I would say like the Mona Lisa by Leonardo da Vinci. That painting, when you see it in the gallery, it sort of exudes this power and amazingness and aura. Yeah. Vincent van Gogh, um, all these kind of like one-offs. So what Benjamin was saying, basically, because they're reproduced, they become less valuable and less important. So they don't, as things, you can just print them off. They're just reproducible. The Mona Lisa, that painting, it's like, gosh, it's just like nothing like it. Even when you produce it, it doesn't have the aura. Okay, so that's what he was kind of getting at. But yeah, films, portrait paintings, that's the sort of thing. So very important essay. In the UK in 37, we had what's called the Mass Observation Project, which is basically Humphrey Spender, and they were trying to use photography to show the sort of daily life of people. It's get this black and white sort of like, and they used hidden cameras, which was quite interesting. So they put the Leicas down their tops and just poke the lens out through the front, and take secret pictures. This was meant to show the state of the nation. Yeah, so that was quite interesting. But then along came Cartier-Bresson. So again, this is what people think of as documentary often. So black and white, Leica, 1938, capturing the moment, the decisive moment. So the beauty in the everyday, the rhythm, the patterns, the moment where everything is in harmony. And he had a fantastic eye, didn't he, of capturing that, Europe. And of course, from that came Magnum. So in 47, after the Second World War, Magnum was formed. And Magnum is, as you might know, an international photographic cooperative, formed by people like Robert Capa, Cartier-Bresson, George Roger, who this is, Rita van der Weert. They all. And the thing about Magnum is all the photographers retain copyright to their work. This on the left. This is an image of the early days, and this is one on the right, quite a contemporary one. It's very male, isn't it? Even the contemporary one, there's about 90% male photographers in there, anyway. But the thing about Magnum is they took photojournalist type pictures, and the money they made out of that, they put into long-term documentary projects. So they had the photojournalism and the documentary going at the same time. And that, I think, still happens to this day. You don't get money for the long-term documentary projects, but you get the one-off photojournalistic pictures. Yeah, let's use the money to do longer projects. So a really good ethos. And it's still surviving to today. And these are the sort of projects. So this is George Roger. So from early days, from the rest of the, I suppose, 20th century, projects like this. So George Roger going off, recording customs, rituals, and communities throughout Africa. These are the Nubas in Sudan. And these would have been quite exotic pictures to see So Magnum were trailblazing, recording the world, finding out new things about the world. So yeah, that 30s up to the 50s, we had this black and white photojournalism type thing. It was quite stable, but then a big change. Okay, so along comes Robert Frank. And this is, again, one of those iconic moments in the history of documentary photography. So a similar approach, black and white, a Leica, wandering around America. He was Swiss, he had a van, he drove around America, sleeping in the van, recording what he saw. And the book The Americans came out, okay, with Jack Kerouac writing the frontispiece, a beat poet. So this was about sort of the itinerant artist, the poet of the poet of the camera, really. Typical photograph, American flag obscuring a person, slightly dirty, grubby window. The photographs were very unromantic. Okay, and that's the thing. Most of the photographs before were quite romantic, quite upbeat. Frank's were quite dreary, really, and quite grim. And I've got a video here of the book. And yeah, some real iconic features. So a lot of American flags, obviously, but the whole gamut. So people, people, very well-off people attending. These are like young kids in the back of a car, but also the cultural, the race issues, lots of street photographs, wealth and the rich and the poor, landscapes, sort of the clubs, the things going on in, this is a great picture, isn't it? A really great picture. Yeah, so it would go from something like this one, which is basically the rich people at the races drinking their champagne and all that sort of stuff. The next one, a black woman sat on her own in the middle of a field with a cross behind. So real iconic imagery. Every picture's telling a huge story. Very snapshot aesthetic. Very lonely, some of them. These are like lonely people sat doing stuff on their own, and it's quite bleak by the bins. It's a dusty, so real social comment, but nothing very positive or glamorous going on here. So this was kind of like a revelation, really. And also, it's not Cartier-Bresson's sort of beautifully composed stuff. It's a bit snapshotty. Okay, so it's a bit the moment after something beautiful happens. So yeah, absolutely critical photographic project in the history of documentary. And then 1963, now even more chaos. So Andy Warhol's Green Car Crash. So Warhol is making montages and collages and out of photojournalists' images. So this is a photograph of a car crash, so a documentary photographic image, and he's decided, I'm going to screen print it, make it green, and do it multiple times. And so this is a huge time. Okay, this is postmodernism kicking in. So everything's up for grabs, everything's questioned, and of course Warhol's at the center of it. And unfortunately, he's using documentary pictures, so he's going to affect the way the documentary is seen after that. And 63, things are starting to get a bit weird. Okay, that's what I'm saying. This is Ed Ruscha's 26 Gasoline Stations, one of the most famous books of fine art documentary photography. And basically, it's just 26 photographs of gasoline stations. Very bleak, very bland. This is Robert Frank taken on to the next step, of bleakness. And the book, these books, amazing stories about these books. They were sold for, I think, $1, piled up in the shops, $1 a book. And they now sell for thousands of pounds, literally. An original copy of this will cost you £5,000 to £10,000, I would think. They're absolutely collector's items. But we can see how documentary is becoming a little bit blurry. Okay. But of course, we still have going on this kind of thing. So you've got the arty documentary stuff going on, but you've also got the war photographers. So Vietnam is a massive point for documentary, isn't it? So the Vietnam photographers like Laurie Burrows are right on the front line. They're actually with the US battalions, which is unheard of now. And they're bringing back pictures like this. And these photographs changed, these got America out of that war. They were so widely distributed. People were outraged what they saw, and the public opinion changed against that war. And, they pulled out. They lost it and they pulled out. And in 1967, there was a very important exhibition called New Documents. And it featured 3 photographers, Diane Arbus, Lee Friedlander, and Garry Winogrand. And they all had slightly quirky takes on documentary. Okay, so Garry Winogrand was doing these very offbeat, sort of wacky street pictures. Diane Arbus was photographing, going into people's houses, photographing the weird and the wonderful, outsiders again. Friedlander was just wandering the streets, doing these sort of snapshots of daily life and stuff going on. So this was a big exhibition, because it's basically, I suppose, putting documentary into the art gallery. Okay, so that's a bit strange. We thought it was meant to be getting out there to the people and making statements through the press and all that sort of thing. But actually, no, it's becoming an art piece, an art genre, if you like. And the British photographer Tony Ray Jones traveled to America at that point, actually, and worked with some of those photographers. Came back and started photographing the UK in this very sort of witty, slightly crazy, sort of surreal way. Okay, obviously it shows the influence of Cartier-Bresson and Garry Winogrand, but it's very English. So Tony Ray Jones is a very important photographer for the development of photography, documentary photography in the United Kingdom. Okay, again, it's black and white, it's a Leica, but it's all a bit sort of, again, a bit offbeat, not too glamorous, not too romantic. And then again, if we think about iconic documentary images, 1972, we've got Vietnam still going on. And this is the napalm attack by the South Vietnam Air Force. Phan Thi Kim Phuc is the figure in the middle, and she's been tracked and traced since then, to show her sort of recovery and the fact. So there's a massive story around this. It's taken by Nick Ut of the Associated Press, who was there at the time. And for once, well, it wouldn't be, would it? It's not constructed. Okay, it's actually what happened. So it's not possible to construct something so horrific as this, is it? So this is a very raw, unstructured, unromantic, unsort of aesthetic documentary image. And these, I think, are generally the ones that have a lot more impact, okay, than the ones that are carefully constructed. And we'll see that as a thread that runs through. 1975, Eugene Smith's Minamata. So yeah, we've still got this idea of the photo essay going on, but this was a book work by Eugene Smith, one of the first book works really to show a serious photo essay. Minamata was a place where there was huge pollution, okay, mercury pollution in the water, basically. And the corporation, Chiso Corporation in the Japanese city, denied any of this. But there were lots of people were getting ill. There were lots of awful deformations at birth. And again, Eugene Smith used the power of photography to make change and to use it as part of the campaign to get the company to come clean. So yeah, another sort of project which brought about change. Yeah, so the last thing I'm going to show you before we have a break is Eggleston's guide. So another very important moment. So this is William Eggleston, very important colour photographer. And we're very much looking at someone who's photographing the everyday. And this is what we see maybe develop within documentary photography, photographers wanting not to sort of keep away a little bit more from the spectacular and the extraordinary, and to photograph on those moments which are more around them and seen as important. Okay, so Eggleston particular photograph, Mississippi, the American South, that's his place. And he has this very kind of like slightly offbeat way with color, very subtle. Yeah, I think it's quite difficult to talk about Eggleston. I always find it difficult. I had to do a lecture on him once at Newport years ago, and it was really hard work because it's one of those photographers that's very difficult to actually put a finger on what it is, what's so lovely about his work. Okay. But yeah, it is lovely, and it's always great to see some new Eggleston stuff that comes out, but it's very difficult to copy it because it has some special thing, which I'm not 100% sure what it is. So that's Eggleston 76. And then I just want to finish this half by another really important piece of writing. So I think at this point, people are beginning to think deeply about photography, about the nature of it. Okay. And that would be coming on the back of some of these changes we've just seen, the Warhol intervention, the Robert Frank book, the Eggleston, the horrific images coming out of Vietnam. So there's a lot of thinking and writing about photography going on. And Sontag, this is the really important book on photography, which I'd encourage everyone to read. It's a collection of her essays. So she's writing about the ethics of suffering. Is it okay to photograph people suffering and then distribute those? What's the power issues here? Is the photographer, in a powerful position over the suffering? Is it really empathy, or is it really just looking at as a sort of a freak show? And so just stopping and thinking, actually, is this okay? What's going on with documentary photography? So yeah, that's really important writing. And I think anyone who's studying photography, it's generally the book that's on any photographic course's reading list. So yeah, if you want to get ahead of the game, if you're going to study photography in future, I'd definitely recommend reading that. Okay, so we're at a point now, late 70s, postmodernism kicked in, and obviously there's going to be some impact on documentary photography. So let's have a 10-minute break while I load up the next half. And what I'd like you to have a think about is what changes do you think, what is going to happen to documentary? What are some key things that you feel might happen to documentary post the things we've just seen? Okay, if we come back in, say 10 minutes, 27, it's a bit precise, isn't it? Let's say 30. So let's say 3:30. So I'm going to stop recording and see you all at 3:30. Thank you.